Welcome to Washington. I'm still reporting on the economy. First of all, my apologies for being absent for the last 4 months. So I'm going to make these far less complex and time-consuming to produce in the hopes of getting them out on a more regular basis. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. That way you will always be notified when I put up something new. First of all, a political action update from here in Washington. Yesterday, market ticker guy Karl Denninger and I were invited to brief a member of a certain senator's staff on what we see in the future for the U.S. economy and what out-of-the-box solutions we would employ to fix the problem. We won't mention any names here because we intend to work with other staffers on Capitol Hill and don't think they would appreciate their names appearing on a YouTube immediately after meeting with us. This gentleman was very knowledgeable on the financial side of the problem, but hadn't had much exposure to the macro-level fixes on the monetary policy side we were proposing. But he listened carefully and gave us many names of other staffers in key positions who would be very interested as well. This is the very first time that we've been able to generate any interest in monetary reform on Capitol Hill, a really groundbreaking meeting. Both Karl and I see another big downturn in the world economy, but no one can predict when it will occur because there are just too many variables. However, we both believe that it will occur this year and that during the next crisis, the supporters of Austrian economic theory will start beating down the doors of Congress, trying to get some sort of a gold money bill in place. Interestingly, this is exactly what World Bank President Robert Zoellick called for on November 8 of last year, writing in the Financial Times. So the gold bugs are in good company there. Here's a picture of Karl and I in front of a large piece of stone money from the Polynesian island of Yap, which we accidentally ran across in the basement of the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History yesterday. This stone money is very important and is described in Chapter 3 of my new book, No More National Debt, which you can find on Amazon.com or at my website, www.billstill.com. Incidentally, Karl has a new book coming out in a few months called Leverage. More on that as it nears publication. Now let's turn to the situation in Iceland and how that relates to Ireland. In the last few weeks, Iceland has arrested 7 executives with Glitnir Bank, one of the big 3 Icelandic banks that collapsed in late 2008. And the administrators of Glitnir's liquidation have sued some of them for $2 billion in New York City, saying they looted the bank by making fraudulent loans to themselves. A month earlier, voters in Iceland rejected a proposed $5 billion deal to repay the UK and the Netherlands for losses incurred by these private banks. The day before the vote, the Wall Street Journal warned that if Icelandic voters rejected the deal, it could, quote, slow the normalization of the country's relations with international financial markets, unquote, and would, quote, face downgrades by rating agencies, close quote. Well, let's see what happened. The Icelandic people didn't listen again. A year earlier, they had rejected an even harsher proposal by a 93 to 7% margin. This time the margin was closer, but a 60 to 40% spread is still by any measure considered a landslide in politics. So what's happened since? Exactly 1 month after this latest vote, Fitch, one of the big rating agencies, raised its outlook on Iceland from negative to stable. Then a few days later, an IMF staff report endorsed additional lending to Iceland by the IMF, saying that Iceland is recovering and will see moderate growth this year. The report said that mortgage restructuring is helping the Icelandic people pay their household bills, many of whom had seen their mortgages double after the 2008 collapse because the bankers had such an unregulated monopoly that many islanders had adjustable rate mortgages that were even pegged to inflation. The bottom line is that Iceland stood up to the threats of the bankers, stood up to the threats of the IMF, and stood up to the threats of the rating agencies and the financial press, and won. They won their freedom by just saying no, no, we will not bail out the bankers. Now, how does this affect Ireland? Ireland is in much better shape to say no to the bankers. No more bailouts for bankers. When I was in Iceland a year ago, members of the Icelandic parliament told me that at the peak of the pressure from the IMF, they were threatened with mass starvation, that the island only had 3 weeks of food left, and that if Iceland did not give in to the IMF demands to cover the bankers' losses, they would be cut off from food imports from the continent. Now that's pressure. Ireland has food production. Ireland has a huge industrial base. And if Ireland stands up to the bankers and rejects IMF calls to raise its corporate tax rate, which at 12% is currently the lowest in the world, businesses will continue to locate there and force other nations to lower their rates instead. Ireland should cut its ties to the EU and boot the euro from Ireland. Ireland does not need borrowed money from Europe in order to have money. Ireland printed its own sovereign money for hundreds of years, the Irish pound or punt. It can do so once again and thereby not have to endure the bankers' plan of economic strangulation through austerity measures. Most of all, Ireland should never, never again allow its government to borrow money. Nations don't have to borrow. Sovereign nations can create all the money they need. This ridiculous notion that one nation must rely on borrowing to have money to circulate is nice work if you can get it for the big bankers, but a horrible deal for the Irish people. So here's the 5-step plan for Ireland. Number 1, reject the euro. Number 2, withdraw from the EU. Number 3, print your own money without debt. Pay off the existing holders of Irish bonds with the new punt. If they don't like it, they don't get paid. Number 4, stop fractional reserve lending. Banks should only be allowed to lend money they actually have. Right now, they lend out at least 12 times the amount of capital they really have, and that's only if they follow the rules. It's nothing but legalized counterfeiting of your national money, but they get to do it because they own your government, because your government borrows from them. Number 5, forbid government borrowing. The borrower shall be servant to the lender, and the Irish of all people should not allow themselves to be slaves to anyone. Restore your sovereignty. I'm still reporting from Washington. Good day.